Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel discussion titled The Multilateral Frontier, Assessing the State of Play and Imperatives for Collective Action in Cyber Diplomacy. Our moderator is Nisha Pilali, international moderator and journalist. Our panelists are Dr. Robin Geiss, Director, UN Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR. His Excellency Massimo Marotti, Managing Director for Strategies and Cooperation, National Cybersecurity Agency, ACN, Italy. Adam Hantman, Deputy Director, Office of International Engagement and Capacity Building, Bureau of Cybersecurity and Digital Policy, U.S. Department of State. Nisha, over to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be moderating this session about a very important subject, and that is international collaboration, another word for cyber diplomacy. As we all know, no single nation can be cyber secure without the help of others. You cannot go it alone, and that is why diplomacy is so very important, even at a time when it seems increasingly more daunting and more complex. So here's what we're going to do in this session. First, we're going to look at the UN cyber negotiations, where they've got to, what the obstacles are. We're also going to hear about some practical measures that are going on at EU and G7 level, and then we're going to chart a path ahead to create better cyber resilience by working together. I hope that sounds good to you. Let's start off now. Dr. Geiss, you're right at the heart of the UN, leading the UNIDIR. Can I ask you, what is your take on what has been achieved so far in the cyber negotiations at the UN? And also, what have been the main obstacles to progress?
Yeah, more than you would think, probably. Thank you, Nisha. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back here at the Global Cybersecurity Forum. It's also great to see how much it has evolved over time. Discussions at the UN have been going on for over 25 years on cybersecurity. So technology is not that new for the UN anymore. And I think what's important to note is that the dialogue itself is a confidence building and a transparency building measure. Because it is a dialogue not just between the like-minded, that's easy. It's a dialogue between everyone, the not so like-minded, states with a very different spectrum of priorities and security needs and views on cybersecurity. So this ongoing dialogue, it's hard to measure what the impact really is. When things escalate, we see it directly, cost of human life, malicious cyber activity, economic cost, and so on. But of course, we don't see so clearly what we've prevented. So the understanding that we've built is much more difficult to track. The misperceptions that we've avoided with these dialogues. But I'll make it more concrete for you. The states have agreed in the General Assembly on an international framework for responsible behavior in cyberspace. That's really the framework under which we currently operate. It has different elements. One of them is that in 2013, all states agreed international law applies in cyberspace. There is no legal vacuum. That's a big
get, is it?
Yeah, no, it is, and this is something to work from, so we're not in a legal void. There is a lot of international law out there. The Charter of the United Nations, first and foremost, so that's the starting point for everyone, and that's a big achievement, I would say. The next is that they've agreed to make it more specific on a set of norms of behavior for states, expectations that we all share, common denominators that everyone should entertain, not allow your territory as a state to be used for malicious cyber activity.
And how hard was it to agree on these norms?
Oh, it took a long time, and of course it's hard. We always set the bar so high as if these things could be agreed easily if you're talking among the not like-minded states. It's hard, of course.
Understood.
These are hard-won victories. Just a few more points on that. Capacity building is a cornerstone, and I'm sure we'll come to that, cornerstone of this framework, of course, and it's a key element to enhance our common cybersecurity. And confidence-building measures, like the processes themselves are, like our institute has contributed one. We're entertaining a cyber policy database where all states provide their national policies so that all other states can see what they're doing, can learn, from these practices, that we have transparency. That's an acknowledged confidence-building measure. And the list is longer. I know we're short on time, but I could go on.
Great, but thank you for giving us those headlines, as it were, Dr. Geiss. Adam Hantman, what's the perspective from Washington on what's been achieved through these UN cyber talks?
Well, I would second what Robin just mentioned. I think the work that has been done, remains ongoing at the UN is incredibly important. Essentially what we're doing here jointly as a community is mapping out the rules of the road to govern a completely new domain. I like to hearken back to the dawn of the nuclear age and how long it took the international community to establish the norms and rules of behavior governing state roles in that space. It took decades, and in historical perspective, we're still in very early days of setting out the new rules of the road for state behavior in cyberspace. So it is incredibly important that we continue to push ahead on this framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Robin touched on capacity building, which is very important. I think one other piece that is also worth mentioning here is that these norms, at the end of the day, these are not self-enforcing norms. And here, what is key is that all states in the international community work together to give these some real weight and to also work jointly together to uplift the capabilities of all states so that they too are able to fulfill their duties under the responsible framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace.
Thank you, Adam. Your Excellency, Mr. Marotti, now you've been a cyber diplomat, if I may call you that, for a long time, and you've worked at both EU level, G7 level within NATO. I want you to specifically tell me about what goes on at EU level in terms of building cooperation, practical confidence-building measures. How would it actually work in practice if a piece of critical infrastructure like a power station or an important hospital system were to get attacked? How would the EU be able to come together to help?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Always good to be in Riyadh. My second time. I'm really happy to be here. You said, well, concrete effort. That's what we do working together at European level. We have the 27 agencies for cybersecurity, and the regular meeting we have is not only dialogue per se, is also heading to some concrete measure. 2 weeks ago in Athens, we met to discuss a proposal to move together to face the threat coming from the post-quantum cryptography. In a few years, the computer evolution will make all the code and keys that we use today useless. Unless we change, we transform those keys with new technology to remain so they can be secure and safe. And the reason why we decided to move together in a process to transform, to adapt and introduce the new keys in all the critical sector is precisely because our infrastructure is a network, and the security of a country might mean damage and insecurity for the neighbor.
Yep.
So this was the most recent result, concrete result of what we do together. We highlight a challenge, we saw a solution, we discuss it, and we move on that direction. The success of this...
So you have common tools?
Yes, we have
common approaches?
We have common approaches, and we have the European regulation that is entering into force in all the 27 countries this month to strengthen the whole architecture of cybersecurity at continental level. And we do it also with partner countries, not only the EU. We have been with Albania recently, last week, for a cooperation agreement, and they are implementing their system based on the European rules and regulations.
Thanks very much, Mr. Marotti. Dr. Geiss, I know that capacity building is close to your heart, but I'm going to ask you before then to tell me a bit more about what you see as the next steps for the UN process discussions, because after all, the threat landscape is evolving ever faster with AI,
Yeah.
5G, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you keep up?
Yeah, no, indeed. How do you keep up? Of course, it's a bit of a stereotype that the law is slow and regulation is slow and the technology is super fast. And I think sometimes that question kind of leads us in the wrong direction because it implies if only we had the right mechanism, the right idea, we could move a lot faster. And I don't think that is the case. We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of ideas for good mechanisms, but diplomacy and change, progress at the multilateral level, they move at the speed of trust. And if you look around the geopolitical environment, there's very little trust right now. In fact, of course, the opposite is true. It's a dramatic state of world affairs currently, and of course that has an impact on multilateral mechanisms, and it has an impact on how we perceive cybersecurity. So that's, in the grand scheme of things, the broader challenge we need not forget. This said, I think what we really need, and it's evident, is more progress in action than in theory or proclamations, declarations. We know what we need to do in many ways. It's, again, not a lack of ideas. We know that hospitals have to be protected at all times against malicious cyber activity. So how do we move forward at the implementation stage? That is really the challenge. And to me, that can only really happen in a decentralized way, with fora like this one, with so many different entities, states individually, like-minded groups, but there will need to be some coordination and kind of bringing it home. And I think for that, the UN remains the best and really the only platform that can do that in a universal way at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Let me just, one more sentence.
Sure, go on.
Agreed on the Pact of the Future just a few days ago, actually. And in that Pact of the Future, they again committed to enhanced international cooperation and capacity building. So hopefully that will blow some wind in our sails.
Adam, where do you see the next steps, the future challenges that must be tackled with urgency?
Well, I concur with Robin that ultimately this is not an either-or approach, and this has to be an all-the above sort of approach. The UN remains a very important platform for this. I think one of the achievements coming out of the past several years of discussions at the UN is the progress towards establishment of a program of action that essentially would institutionalize dialogue on cyber issues at the United Nations in an enduring fashion. And this is absolutely key in making sure that we have this platform for discussion among states there in perpetuity, essentially there. So that's one key piece there. All that said, there are other mechanisms as well that are going to be very key to ensuring that we give some weight to all this and build on the gains that we've had. Capacity building is going to be a key piece of this. There are also coalitions of the willing, if you will, among like-minded states who get together around a common purpose that may be able to tackle some of these problems as well. I'll just give you an example. Right now, this week in Washington, the White House is hosting the Counter-Ransomware Initiative, which is a collection now of nearly 70 countries and international organizations who have come together to focus their energies on combating the scourge of ransomware, which threatens our economies and the safety and privacy of our citizens. Working on developing funding and capacity building opportunities to enable countries, law enforcement, a wide range of networks to tackle this common problem. And so I think coalitions and groupings like these, some ad hoc in nature, some perhaps more permanent, will be also important features of the institutional
alongside the UN negotiations. So having
the UN.
smaller coalitions on specific tasks can also play an important role, like with the ransomware group. And indeed, G7 level cooperation is now underway. Can you tell us a little bit more, Mr. Marotti, about what you hope that will achieve?
Yes, we realized that at the G7 level, there was not a group of the Agency for Cybersecurity. Although the group has addressing cybersecurity policies since at least 2015, but the agency, they were not working together. So this year, around the idea that we were looking for to try to find a mechanism, a system based on artificial intelligence to anticipate the attacks, to anticipate the trends of an attack. And we thought with our team to enlarge the discussion. And the idea came out to establish a working group of the agencies. And now, after the meeting in Rome mid-May, we are working on two sets of priorities. The first one that has been proposed by the United States is to work together on trying to standardize the mechanism to protect critical infrastructure in the energy sector. Very specific,
Energy
very
sector,
concrete
yep.
item. The second one, which was proposed by Italy and Germany, is to precisely to work together to search a way to have a system based on artificial intelligence which reinforce our cybersecurity capacity.
Right.
Mainly in the area of the anticipation of an aggression.
So using it yourself to try and be a bit ahead of the game, as it were.
Yes, not only work for the security of artificial intelligence, their component, the program, the system, the model, also how to use artificial intelligence for security.
That's fascinating. And we're going to have a discussion on that very theme later this afternoon. So we've heard a lot about capacity building and the importance of it. What do you mean by that, Dr. Geiss? Are we talking about bringing the whole world together, rich and poor, to get for more effective protection of citizens?
No, certainly we're trying to close the digital divide in many ways, and the digital divide, of course, has many facets, but it clearly also exists in the security domain in which we work. And then it's not a kind of a one-off approach, because cyberspace is not static, as we've heard many times, and so our thinking about capacity building should also be as dynamic as the technology we're trying to deal with. It can mean very different things. I mean, threat identification, threat awareness, response actions. It can, from our side, capacity building in terms of policy, international law implementation. This is something that we run a program where we bring 90 delegates this year, and they're all specialists already from all over the world, especially developing countries. We bring all of them to our institute to engage in capacity building around norms implementation, international law, and how it's to be interpreted. It's just one small facet and another example of the decentralized approach. We probably need to close that huge gap. But I think we also need, again, that coordinating function at a universal bird's eye perspective level that only the UN can bring as the only exclusively inclusive, fully inclusive platform. The Digital Compact has just reconfirmed that role of the United Nations, coordinating it and also perhaps being a bit more experimental about capacity building, testing and trying different formats and what works and what doesn't, being a bit open-minded also to stop working on things that don't work. The multi-stakeholder...
Well, that's good to hear. I don't always think of UN and experimental in one sentence, but that's nice.
I'm the director of the UN think tank on these issues. We should be a bit experimental. If not us, who else? But the multi-stakeholder approach, I was going to say, is also probably part of that. Working with different formats, seeing how it can work, what can other stakeholders bring to this capacity building effort. It's not a state only, UN only. It clearly has to be a multi-stakeholder process involving industry, academia, NGOs, civil society just as well.
Absolutely. So, Adam Hantman, capacity building is one of your core responsibilities. How do you see the role of the US and other states in helping to build resilience in low-income countries?
Well, it's a good question, and I would start here talking a little bit about our U.S. international cyberspace and digital policy strategy, which Secretary Blinken released earlier this year, and it really guides our work and our thinking here about this particular line of work. And one of the most important principles in that is the notion of digital solidarity. And essentially, it is the idea that no country, no company, no single actor can by themselves go it alone. And essentially what it means is that we all need to work together in a more unified, integrated manner, and also come to each other's aid when states need it. This is important not just in responding to incidents of malicious cyber activity, but also in making sure that we're all able, as we mentioned before, to help implement the framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And so the United States is very committed to providing assistance to countries across the world, including in developing nations, to raise their capabilities and capacity levels on cyber and digital issues. And just for a few examples, we've now provided over $300 million to a variety of countries, over 140 at less count, helped train thousands of individuals on everything from workforce development, so think high school students interested in cyber careers, assistance with drafting national cyber security legislation, assistance to computer emergency response teams in various nations. And this is something that we take very seriously and will be a very significant stream of work for us moving forward. Just one specific example, if I may. Costa Rica in 2022 suffered a series of very crippling ransomware attacks. In the wake of that, we mobilized around $25 million in assistance to help them respond to these incidents, build back their cyber defenses farther, and build their resilience to these sorts of incidents in the future. These are important sorts of examples of some of the work that we are doing. Other nations, like-minded nations, are doing this as well. And this is a key part of this idea of digital solidarity.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the Costa Rica example. Your Excellency, Mr. Marotti, I'm going to give you the final word. I know it's a cliche, but it seems to me so often that cyber defenders and cyber diplomats are playing catch-up. You're always, the threat landscape is always out there and you're a few steps behind. So I wanted to ask you this, if it's not too cheeky. When you wake up in the morning and you reach out for your first cup of coffee, what is going on in your mind? What are the key things you hold in your mind to motivate you through the day?
Well, it's interesting. Well, certainly the first challenge is to go to a place of work where everybody around you, there are engineer, informatics, super expert, and you feel a little bit out of place. But what I do with my team all the time, as we are all very passionate for cybersecurity, but not the people on the machine, working on the machine, like our great colleagues. So what we see, the world we work in as a system, a complex system. So we try to bring every day, also from the outside world, ideas, fact, discussions, concerns that we inject in the agency work with other partners. We discuss at the beginning what we learn happening in Japan or in the US or in Europe or from the closest meeting that we have. And we process those ideas to see how we can inject it in the process of growth that the agency is experiencing now. And all my team, they are fantastic young people, but they are so dedicated. They found work.
So it's almost like in a newsroom. You meet first thing in the morning and you think, okay, what's happened around the world? Let's bring it together. What happens next?
That's obliged me to be the first one in the office in the morning, which is easy because I sleep less due to my age.
Very interesting. And then how do you make sure that you move beyond just the current reaction to having a sort of systematic way of looking at the threat landscape?
Because we work on giving a picture that we transfer to the other teams, and they always are thankful because we enlarge the scope of their work. We inject in their work through the cooperation, international cooperation, and all the support that we give them. We expand their way of doing, and they are happy about it. And they always say that with the introduction of this Department of International Affairs, let's say, in the agency, work became a little bit fun. So it's working.
And this is why Mr. Marotti is always smiling. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you agree that through our discussion of cyber diplomacy, we have come to a point of looking at it at the big level, about theories and principles, about norms and international law, and the importance of bringing people to talk, even at a time of such heightened tensions. We heard that from Dr. Geiss loud and clear. But we've also been talking about the practical measures that can be done. One country and another country, sharing good practices, right? We heard that about what happened in Costa Rica and the way the US assisted them. And we've also heard about how we have regional groupings working together to create common standards and common confidence-building measures, for instance, at the EU. I have found it to be a really interesting discussion. I hope you have too. Let's put our hands together to thank our guests now. Dr. Geiss, His Excellency Mr. Marotti, and Adam Hantman.
Thank you.